Hello and welcome to the Source One podcast. Consider us your source for the latest procurement, supply management, and strategic sourcing insights, anytime, anywhere.
Today I'm going to talk about fleet management and procurement and where to start the evaluation process of evaluating your fleet operations in your organization. The relationship between company fleet vehicles and procurement is definitely an interesting one. In some instances, there are entire teams dedicated to managing fleet spend, and in other cases, companies leave fleet completely unmanaged, or they use a third party to manage all aspects or just select aspects of fleet-related activities. So fleet is an area in procurement where significant cost savings opportunities often lie, but the knowledge of how to get those savings and how to evaluate the fleet spend, it's often perceived as mysterious. Organizations can typically break overall fleet spend down into a handful of key subcategories. This will make things easier to digest when starting a fleet assessment. Those key areas are acquisition, maintenance, fuel, remarketing and administration, and licensing. Those are good places to start. Of course, there are other ancillary subcategories, but these 5 typically encompass the most impactful spend categories. So first, with acquisition. The acquisition of fleet units and the financial strategy behind acquisition is at the core of fleet management. To buy or lease is the first question that organizations should answer. Or, if even further, capital lease. Is this something that you should consider, or maybe it's an operating lease? What depreciation schedule should you use? In general, it is important to understand how your company's accounting and financing strategy impacts vehicle financing and which methodology is most beneficial when accounting for assets on your books. There are a lot of questions that need to be asked and that need to be answered. When developing a financial strategy specifically, it's important to bring together both finance, accounting, operations, and other business units as needed to collaborate in making a holistic decision. The most obvious cost driver in the relation to vehicle acquisition is deciding which units you should acquire. This is where operations typically takes the lead. The first question that should be asked is, what is the purpose of the vehicle? Are they sedans for insurance adjusters, or are they tanker trucks for propane distribution, for example? Or are they tree trimming trucks for a utility company? Overall, the use of the vehicle needs to be properly aligned with the specifications of that vehicle. You wouldn't want to buy a diesel Ford F-350, for example, for the insurance adjusters due to the high fuel mileage and high acquisition costs of that Ford F-350. But extreme examples aside, rationalizing your fleet vehicles for the specific application and ensuring things such as fuel mileage and add-ons and specs, hoists for tow trucks, for example, or decals, they need to line up with the need of the vehicle versus what drivers or fleet managers prefer. Corcentric's Capital Equipment Group has a plethora of different tools and market data to drive decisions in this space. So moving on to the next area in fleet to look at would be maintenance. So this is another area to evaluate for cost savings. You can have the best acquisition strategy and the perfect mix of fleet vehicles for your application, but if they are continuously breaking down, it will cancel out any cost savings that you earn through acquisition or other areas. Evaluating the fleet management policy by vehicle type is the first step. Does the maintenance plan line up with the manufacturer recommendations? Are maintenance costs surging in the older vehicles? And possibly the most important question, are drivers complying with your established maintenance policies today? A mismanaged maintenance program can destroy fleet budgets and put drivers in danger. Performing an analysis on the total cost of ownership of a vehicle versus the cost of maintenance over the life of the vehicle or lease is something that can help fleet managers determine when to replace older vehicles with new ones and get overall better visibility into just maintenance costs in general. Once visibility is obtained, then decisions can be made. So that's maintenance. The next area would be fuel. Fuel is often an overlooked category for savings opportunities in fleet, but there are many configurations and programs for fuel that you can employ. First, you need to evaluate what return you are getting via rebate on your fuel card spend if you're managing your fuel through a fuel card. What are your in-network gas stations, and does that line up with where your business is located and what your footprint is? And which gas stations may be considered out of network? And again, it all needs to line up with the routes that your fleet drivers are traveling. And getting a competitive rebate for in-network fueling, it's definitely an easy way to bolster savings. Additionally, looking at alternate programs such as on-site fueling programs or dedicated fuel where you're storing fuel on-site, that can help increase your cost savings opportunities. On-site fueling, for example, it's a great alternative if driver fraud and misreporting of personal fuel versus business miles is something that you deal with on a day-to-day basis. Remarketing is another area to look at for cost savings. I know we've talked about acquisition, maintenance, and fuel, but remarketing, it's another good area to look at cost savings for fleet programs. So remarketing, it's a great way to offset acquisition costs and get as much value as possible out of the vehicles that are being cycled out of use. Remarketing typically isn't a huge spend category, but it's important that your remarketing strategy, and when I say remarketing, I mean selling your old vehicles on the open market. It's important that your remarketing strategy aligns with your goals in selling vehicles. Are you looking to get optimal value back for the assets being sold? So you're trying to get the most money? Or are you just looking to sell the assets as soon as possible at potentially less than fair market value? Or are you looking to just get out of troubled vehicles and getting those off your books? Your goals as a fleet manager will determine where the vehicles are sold and how they are sold, whether it's at an auction market or a private listing. You should investigate these costs and look at the remarketing fees overall. Flat fees per vehicle and commission based on the sales value are the most common fees to look at in remarketing. And just looking at the overall cost of outsourced remarketing programs that can have a different fee model. If remarketing is handled in-house, the time to sale and time investment of internal resources definitely needs to be measured and weighed as far as your overall costs for remarketing. Lastly, licensing and administration fees. It's another great area to look at for cost savings. Licensing and administration fees, it's a broad array of different fees that can add up over time, both in terms of the burden on your internal staff to manage if you're handling these fees and administrative, licensing and safety training, etc. If that's handled in-house, that can burden your internal staff, and there's a cost to that. The spend category includes anything from managing the title and insurance docs to managing the lease and financing documentation. Record retention of driver information and vehicle information is very important data to provide visibility into your program, and also enables compliance with DOT and other financial or regulatory requirements. You may have internal resources where their sole responsibility is to manage this aspect of the fleet program, or you may outsource it to someone such as Element or ARI. But either way, there's significant costs associated with managing all the documentation related to a fleet program. So it's an area that you need to look at in terms of how you're managing it, what you're paying for that, and what that cost is, and are there alternative options. So overall, when looking into the total cost to manage and run a fleet of vehicles, there are many cost drivers involved, some of that we reviewed today, the most important ones at least. Now, it is important to take an all-encompassing approach, starting with the largest cost drivers, which would typically be acquisition, and then working your way down towards remarketing and administrative fees, the other ancillary fees that may be involved for fleet program. But once you do that in that order, it will enable a streamlined and comprehensive fleet evaluation.
You've been listening to the Source One podcast. For more strategic sourcing and procurement insights every day, visit our blog, The Strategic Sorcerer. Want to provide feedback or suggest a topic for a future episode? Let us know at prrequest@sourceoneinc.com. Thanks for listening.